What's up guys, welcome back. This is anime fiction. You'll be watching What If Naruto Became the Living Myth of Los Santos Part 1. Now, let's begin. The rain fell in sheets, cold and unforgiving, washing the blood from the shattered stone of the Valley of the End. The deafening roar of the waterfall, usually a symbol of the immense power of the founding fathers of the Hidden Leaf, was entirely drowned out by the heavy, ragged breathing of two boys pushed far past their mortal limits. Naruto Uzumaki lay on his back, the freezing water pooling around his ears. The sky above him was a swirling vortex of slate-gray clouds, heavy with the sorrow of a world that had been at war for far too long. His entire body screamed in agony. Every muscle fiber felt as though it had been shredded and stitched back together with burning wire. His chakra coils, normally a roaring ocean of golden energy thanks to Kurama, were reduced to a sputtering, dry ember. Across from him, stumbling through the knee-deep water, was Sasuke Uchiha. The last survivor of the Uchiha clan looked no better. His clothes were torn to rags, his Sharingan spinning erratically, bleeding from the immense strain of the battle. They had thrown everything at each other. Ninjutsu that shattered mountains. Taijutsu that broke the sound barrier. The wrath of the tailed beasts and the divine power of the Susanoo. And now, at the very end of all things, they were reduced to nothing more than two battered orphans, swinging exhausted fists in the mud. "Give up, Naruto," Sasuke rasped, his voice barely a whisper over the pouring rain. He raised his left hand, dark lightning crackling weakly around his palm. The Chidori. It wasn't the roaring, blinding mass of energy it used to be. It was barely the size of a baseball, sparking and fizzling, but it was enough to end it. Naruto gritted his teeth, his knuckles digging into the submerged stone as he forced himself up onto his knees. His right hand trembled violently. He didn't have the chakra for a Rasengan. He didn't even have the chakra to stand. But he was Naruto Uzumaki. Yielding was a concept that simply did not exist in his vocabulary. "Never," Naruto coughed, spitting a glob of blood into the churning water. "I'm taking you back, Sasuke. Even if I have to break all your bones to do it." But as Sasuke took a step forward, the world shuddered. It wasn't an earthquake. It wasn't the shockwave of a jutsu. It was a fundamental tear in the fabric of reality. High above the shattered statues of Madara Uchiha and Hashirama Senju, the gray sky abruptly fractured. A horrific screeching sound echoed through the valley, like 1,000 pieces of metal grinding against each other. Naruto and Sasuke both froze, their eyes widening as they looked up. The sky was tearing open, but it didn't look like Kaguya's dimensional portals. It was entirely unnatural. The edges of the tear were jagged, blinking rapidly in blinding flashes of neon pink, green, and blue. Inside the tear, the sky didn't reveal a void or another dimension. It revealed a rapidly shifting sequence of strange, geometric grids and floating lines of incomprehensible symbols. It looked like the world was being peeled back to reveal a screen beneath it. "What is that?" Sasuke muttered, the Chidori dying in his hand as he stared at the anomaly. "System error," a voice seemed to whisper. Not in their ears, but directly inside their minds. It was a cold, mechanical voice, devoid of emotion, devoid of chakra. Entity conflict detected. Attempting rerouting. Suddenly, the anomaly violently expanded. A powerful vacuum force erupted from the rift, pulling the rain, the debris, and the very air upwards. Before either of them could react, something was spat out of the rift. It plummeted through the sky, a heavy, dark object completely foreign to the elemental nations. It crashed into the water just a few feet away from Naruto with a heavy splash, sending a wave of muddy water over him. It was a thick, black canvas duffel bag, bearing a strange white logo, Amu Nation. The impact tore the bag open. Heavy, metallic objects spilled out into the water. They didn't look like kunai, or swords, or anything forged by a blacksmith in the Iron Country. They were intricate, cold, and smelled sharply of sulfur, oil, and ozone. Sasuke, recovering his focus, narrowed his eyes. More tricks? It doesn't matter. He forced the dark lightning to spark to life in his hand once more. "This ends now, Naruto." He lunged forward, closing the distance between them in a desperate, final sprint. Naruto scrambled backward in the water. He had no chakra. He had no kunai. His hand desperately slapped against the submerged rocks, looking for anything to defend himself with. His fingers wrapped around cold, heavy steel. He pulled it from the water. It was a long, black metallic tube attached to a strange, ergonomic handle. It was an LSPD-issue pump-action shotgun. Naruto didn't know what a gun was. He had never seen a firearm in his life, but he was a shinobi. He understood the mechanics of a weapon instantly. He felt the weight distribution. He noticed the lever near the handle, resembling the trigger mechanism of a specialized crossbow. He didn't know what it fired, but survival instinct took over. Sasuke was airborne, bringing the Chidori down directly toward Naruto's heart. With a roar of pure desperation, Naruto hoisted the heavy weapon, aimed the barrel directly at Sasuke's chest, and squeezed the trigger. The explosion was deafening. It wasn't the boom of an explosive tag or the crackle of a jutsu. It was the concussive, mechanical roar of gunpowder igniting. A blinding flash of yellow fire erupted from the barrel. Sasuke's eyes widened in absolute shock. He had braced for a physical impact, perhaps a desperate punch. He hadn't braced for a spray of 12-gauge buckshot. The spread caught him midair, the sheer kinetic force of the blast shattering his Chidori and sending him flying violently backward, skipping across the water like a thrown stone before crashing into the rock face. Naruto was thrown backward as well, the immense, unfamiliar recoil of the shotgun dislocating his exhausted shoulder. The weapon slipped from his grasp as he crashed into the water. Before he could process what had just happened, what this terrifying, thunderous weapon was, the glitching tear in the sky let out a final, agonizing screech. Rerouting complete. Initializing server transfer. The vacuum force magnified 1,000-fold. The water beneath Naruto surged upward in a massive column, carrying him with it. He tried to scream, but the air was sucked from his lungs. He looked down one last time, seeing Sasuke lying motionless on the rocks, staring up at him in disbelief, before the world of the elemental nations dissolved into a blinding white light. Then came the clouds. Naruto was floating. He was no longer wet, or cold, or bleeding. He was drifting in a strange, aerial view above an impossibly massive city. He saw towering structures of glass and steel reaching into the sky, vast networks of gray roads filled with fast-moving metal boxes, and a sprawling, glittering ocean that looked nothing like the seas of his home. The camera angle shifted, panning over a massive sign on a hill that read Vinewood. Naruto tried to move, but he had no body. He was just a perspective, floating in the clouds. He heard a strange, rhythmic music playing in the background, a slow, synthesized beat that pulsed with an electronic rhythm. Joining GTA Online. The words materialized in his vision, glowing in a crisp, white font. He felt a sudden, terrifying sensation of being unmade. His memories, his personality, his very soul were being broken down into ones and zeros, filtered through a massive, incomprehensible digital architecture, and being forced into a new mold. He felt the system trying to assign him a player ID, trying to strip away his autonomy and turn him into a hollow avatar. But Kurama's chakra, deep within his core, roared in defiance. The system stuttered. It couldn't override a soul that burned that brightly. Error. Player registry corrupted. Forcing localized instance. The floating clouds abruptly vanished. Gravity returned with a vengeance. Naruto slammed face first into cold, hard concrete. The smell of garbage, stale beer, and exhaust fumes assaulted his nose. Rain was falling again, but it felt dirty, acidic. Groaning, he pushed himself up onto his hands and knees. His orange tracksuit was dry, the blood and tears from his battle magically gone. He was whole, he was healed. He looked down. Clutched tightly in his right hand was the heavy, black shotgun that had saved his life. Naruto Uzumaki slowly stood up, stepping out of the dark alleyway and onto the neon-lit pavement of Strawberry Avenue. Cars roared past him, their headlights cutting through the dark, 2013 Los Santos night. He gripped the shotgun, staring up at the towering skyscrapers. The elemental nations were gone. The living myth had just logged in. The asphalt was sticky from a thin layer of filth and oily rain. Naruto stood immobile beneath the flickering, yellowish hum of a broken streetlight. In the Hidden Leaf Village, the night was filled with crickets, the rustle of leaves in the vast forests, and the odd distant bark of an Inuzuka dog. Here, the night roared. It was a mechanical beast that didn't sleep. In the distance, sirens sounded off towering concrete canyons, pitching up and down in a frenetic, terrible cadence. The air tasted awful, heavy with the odor of unburned gasoline, stale tobacco, and rotting rubbish from a nearby overflowing dumpster. Every breath seemed heavy in his lungs, as if it lacked the elemental nation's naturally pure force. Naruto gradually lowered his gaze to his hands. He was still dressed in his characteristic orange and black tracksuit, but the cloth felt different. It was firmer, drier, and utterly unaffected by the sludge and blood of the Valley of Death. His body, which had just moments before been brought to the edge of death by Sasuke's Chidori, felt perfectly fine. Better than fine, actually. He felt a peculiar, buzzing vigor, but his chakra network felt completely closed, compacted into a tight, confined root. He strengthened his hold on the cold metal object in his right hand, the shotgun. He remembered the concussive blast, the blinding flash of fire, and the sheer physical power that had knocked Sasuke backward. He held the weapon up to his chest and examined it beneath the dim streetlight. It was weighty, made of matte black steel and some type of hard, synthetic wood. It lacked the grace of a forged katana and the straightforward, lethal balance of a kunai. It was a blunt and brutal instrument. Naruto traced his calloused thumb across the trigger guard. He remembers squeezing the little lever to start the fire. He pressed the trigger again, being careful to point the long metal tube at the brick wall of a nearby pawn store. Click. Nothing occurred. There's no fire, no tremendous boom. Only a dry, metallic click. He furrowed his brow, his tactical shinobi mind immediately attempting to deconstruct the gadget. It isn't powered by chakra, he reasoned. It must have some sort of actual ammunition, such as a senbon launcher, and a mechanism for preparing the next attack. He grasped the grooved wooden grip beneath the barrel and pulled. The pump was stiff, but with a quick tug, it slid rearward with a satisfying, heavy clack. A crimson, cylindrical shell ejected from the side port, clattering on the damp pavement, and a fresh one was flawlessly chambered. He didn't really comprehend it yet, but he recognized the rhythm. It was his new weapon. Suddenly, Naruto felt a strong, piercing ache behind his eyes. He gasped, collapsing to one knee and grabbing his head as his eyesight became brutally distorted. The environment did not simply blur. It fractured into jagged, static-filled horizontal lines, like a damaged television screen. The player registry is corrupted. The cold, mechanical voice rang in his consciousness as he initialized the safe mode head-up display. When Naruto opened his eyes, he found that the world had altered. A luminous, semi-transparent circle appeared in the lower left corner of his peripheral vision. It was a small map. White lines represented the streets surrounding him. A little, white arrow rested squarely in the center, revolving as he turned his head. What is this? Naruto wondered, waving his palm in front of his face. His fingertips went right through the luminous map. It was not projected in front of him, but rather hooked directly into his optic nerves. Under the circular map, two thick bars appeared. The bottom one was a dull, empty blue. The upper one was a bright, solid green. As he focused on the green bar, he noticed an odd link. It reflected his vital force. It wasn't his chakra, but rather his bodily energy, which this weird new universe calculated and analyzed. His stamina was represented by a narrow yellow bar that pulsed slightly. He felt inside, looking for the familiar, scorching warmth of Kurama. He located the seal, but the big iron gates appeared strange. They were represented as luminous wire frames, with lines of digital code pouring down the bars. Inside, the huge nine tails lay asleep, surrounded in a shimmering, digital stasis barrier. Warning. The entity, Kurama, has exceeded the server's bandwidth. Quarantined pending integration. Naruto gritted his teeth, panic quickly rising in his chest. Hey, stupid fox. Wake up, he exclaimed inwardly. However, there was no reaction. For the first time in his life, he was genuinely separated from the beast. He was on his own. He rose up and forced himself to calm down. Panic meant death on the mission. Kakashi-sensei had taught him that years before. Assess the situation. Gather intelligence. Survive. An abrupt and strong vibration frightened him. It was originating from his right thigh. He slapped his pocket and felt a hard, rectangular lump that hadn't been there previously. He reached inside and brought out a sleek black slab of glass and plastic. The screen brightened the dark alleyway, displaying a colorful emblem of a piece of fruit with a bite cut out of it. The screen read, "I fruit." It was a phone, But Naruto had no idea what a smartphone was. He looked at the bright icons, absolutely perplexed. A small envelope indicator at the top of the screen was marked with a red number, 1. Before he could figure out how to press the glass, the noise of a powerful engine interrupted his focus. A dark purple, substantially modified Albany Buccaneer muscle car sped around the corner of Strawberry Avenue, its tires squealing on the wet tarmac. The bass from the car's music system was so strong that it rattled the surrounding storefront windows and vibrated Naruto's chest. The automobile slowed as it reached him, its headlights briefly blinding him. Inside, 3 men in huge purple attire and big gold chains stared at him. To them, Naruto appeared to be a complete lunatic. A teenager standing in the center of Balla's territory, wearing a neon orange jumpsuit that nearly glowed in the dark and openly wielding an LSPD pump-action shotgun. The passenger side window rolled down. A huge cloud of pungent, sweet-smelling smoke billowed into the frigid night air. "Man, what kind of freak show is this?" the man in the passenger seat exclaimed, looking out the window. He wore a thick bandana around his head and sneered, promising violence. "You lost, Halloween? You in the wrong neighborhood to be waving that heat around." Naruto's blue eyes sharpened, and his grip on the shotgun tightened. He didn't understand half of what the man was saying. The dialect was harsh, quick, and unrelated to the delicate language of the shinobi settlements. "I am not lost," Naruto said, his voice steady and with the natural authority of a seasoned combatant. "I am Naruto Uzumaki. Where am I? What is this village?" The 3 men in the automobile glanced at him for a second before laughing cruelly and mockingly. "Village? This fool thinks he's in a village," the driver exclaimed, revving the Buccaneer's engine threateningly. "This is Los Santos, kid. And you're standing on Chamberlain gangster family's turf. Wait, nah, we took this block yesterday. This is Balla's turf now." The man in the backseat pushed forward, the metallic slide of a firearm booming throughout the cabin. "Look at his clothes, man. He ain't wearing green. He ain't wearing purple. Just smoke his crazy ass and take that shotgun. It looks brand new." The passenger nodded, his manner quickly changing from mocking to dangerous. He reached beneath his seat and drew out a micro SMG, putting the barrel on the windowsill and aiming it straight at Naruto's chest. "Drop the boomstick, bright boy. Last warning." The computerized map in Naruto's view abruptly flashed. The white arrow representing him was now surrounded by 3 bright, blinking red dots. When hostiles were discovered, his shinobi instincts cried out. The game's engine anticipated a certain set of occurrences here. It expected the player to either push a button to seek shelter, raise their weapon, or flee. It had pre-programmed animations and frame data for each of these activities. But Naruto was not a typical player, he was a glitch. Before the Balla's gangster could fully wrap his finger around the trigger of his SMG, Naruto moved. He did not use chakra to increase his speed because he did not need to. The system had logged his player stats, and due to his natural physical prowess, his strength and stamina stats were instantaneously maxed out, breaking the game's set restrictions. He covered the 10 feet between the sidewalk and the car in a fraction of a second, completely outside the game's typical animation frames. To the gangsters, he was only a blur. Crack. Naruto brought the shotgun's hefty wooden stock down with devastating force on the Buccaneer's roof, swiftly caving in the steel frame. The hit was so strong that it smashed the passenger side window. The guy with the SMG panicked and blindly pressed the trigger. Burr burr burr. The loud buzz of the submachine pistol boomed down the street. 3 9mm rounds hit Naruto in the shoulder and chest. Naruto fell back, expecting the excruciating sensation of pierced lungs and broken bones. He anticipated to cough up blood. But the ache was quite different. It was blunt and synthetic. He looked down. There were no bullet holes in his jacket. There is no blood flowing. Instead, he received a piercing, digital beep in his mind. He noticed the bright UI in his peripheral vision. The solid green bar had chipped away, losing approximately 10% of its mass. He had sustained harm, but he was not injured, he had health points. Naruto's face lit up with a ferocious, exhilarating grin. The regulations here were utterly ridiculous, but he could deal with them. "My turn," Naruto exclaimed. He lunged forwards again. The driver, horrified by the unstoppable youth who had just eaten a burst of SMG fire without hurting, slammed his foot on the gas. The Buccaneer's tires blazed as it attempted to rip out. Naruto did not even think. He reacted solely on combat instincts. He pointed the shotgun's barrel toward the rear tire of the fleeing muscle car and reflexively yanked the wooden pump handle back and forth, clack clack, chambering the cartridge as he had practiced moments before. He pulled the trigger. The thunder of the shotgun was amplified in the tiny street. The 12-gauge buckshot ripped the rear tire instantaneously, blowing it apart. The Buccaneer violently fishtailed, and the driver lost all control. The hefty car collided sideways with a fire hydrant, unleashing a large jet of water into the night sky. The three ballas got out of the smashed, sinking automobile, dropping their guns and running blindly into the alleyway, afraid of the blonde fiend in orange. Naruto dropped the shotgun and exhaled heavily. The red dots on his minimap dissipated, leaving him in a tranquil, neutral condition. He brushed a drop of rain from his brow and gazed at the towering geyser of water flowing across the pavement. Okay. Naruto murmured to himself as he racked the shotgun again. The empty crimson shell flew out, pinging on the wet pavement. This place is crazy, but I think I can handle it. His peripheral vision suddenly became blindingly brilliant. In the upper right corner of his vision, a single, brilliant white star appeared. It blinked rhythmically, accompanied by a low, frightening bass note in his head. In the distance, the wailing sirens abruptly shifted course. They weren't simply echoing aimlessly anymore. They were merging. The white star pulsed rapidly. A text box emerged in the center of his vision, obscuring his view for a brief moment before going to the top of his screen. Tutorial. You committed a crime. Lose the cops to complete your wanted level. Naruto's grip on the shotgun tightened as the first set of flashing red and blue lights turned the bend into Strawberry Avenue. Cops. Naruto smirked. Bring it on. How was the pacing? We've got him figuring out his UI, taking his first damage, and now he has his first wanted level. Chapter 3. The Art of Star. The flashing red and blue lights cut through the torrential rain in Los Santos, painting the alleyway's brick walls with furious, chaotic strobes. The siren's howl, which had been a faint echo only moments before, had become a loud screech right in front of him. Two LSPD cruisers slapped their brakes, fishtailing slightly on the slick tarmac before coming to a sudden halt at the alley's entrance. The doors sprang open very immediately. 4 officers spilled out, using their car doors as cover. LSPD. Drop the weapon and put your hands on your head. Do it now, a voice yelled from a megaphone, drowning out the hiss of the ruptured fire hydrant that was still shooting water onto the street. Naruto stood still, the heavy pump-action shotgun still tightly clenched in his right palm. His shinobi instincts heightened, with adrenaline coursing through his veins. In his environment, confronting 4 armed opponents in a narrow passageway meant one of 2 options: a quick, devastating engagement or a tactical withdrawal. He did not want to kill these men. They wore matching uniforms and were undoubtedly local police enforcement, similar to the Uchiha police force from the Leaf Village. He did not want to become the village's enemy on his first night. Before he could decide what to do next, his UI sprang to life again. The single white star in the upper right corner of his vision began blinking rapidly. More crucially, the little luminous map in his lower left peripheral vision moved. The 4 officers looked to be flashing red and blue dots. Each dot emitted a dazzling blue, clear cone of light that projected outward like a flashlight beam. The cones moved across the digital map, revealing the alleyway. Naruto immediately recognized vision cones. It was a sensory representation of their line of vision. Back home, evading Enbu Black Ops meant hiding your chakra and remaining in the shadows. The regulations were depicted directly in front of him. If he stepped into the blue cones, people would notice him. If he stayed out of them, he became practically invisible to the system. I said drop it, kid, one of the officers screamed, his patience running out. A laser sight penetrated the rain and landed as a brilliant red dot on Naruto's orange jacket. Sorry. Gotta run. Naruto screamed back. He did not hesitate. He whirled on his heel and darted deeper into the alleyway, away from the cruisers. Suspect is fleeing. Open fire. The thundering crack of standard issue 9mm handguns rang against the concrete walls. Sparks flew as gunshots ricocheted from the garbage and bricks surrounding him. Naruto felt a sharp, synthetic sting graze his left calf. and his green health bar chipped away at only a fraction of an inch. It did not slow him down. There was no muscle rupture or hemorrhage. It was only numbers ticking down. He pushed his legs harder, preparing to use his chakra to propel himself onto the rooftops. However, his chakra network remained stubbornly constricted. Instead, the game's physics engine seized over. The algorithm had maxed out his base stats, making his sprint terrifyingly fast. He moved like a blur of fluorescent orange, his sneakers slamming against the wet pavement at the rate of an Olympic sprinter on fast forward. The heavy shotgun in his fingers felt weightless as his stamina bar. The thin yellow line beneath his health moved only slightly. He had reached the end of the alleyway. A 10-foot-tall chain-link fence topped with rusting barbed wire coils blocked his path. Beyond it was a maze of private backyards in the Chamberlain Hills neighborhood. The game engine featured a special animation for this. A player was intended to sprint up, grab the links, haul himself up awkwardly, and fling their legs over, which would take at least 3 or 4 seconds. Naruto smacked the fence without slowing down. He sprang and planted one foot in the center of the chain-link surface. The metal groaned beneath the uncalculated kinetic force of his maximum strength stat. He used the fence as a springboard to propel himself higher, clearing the barbed wire in a smooth, acrobatic flip. He fell quietly on the muddy grass of the backyard on the opposite side, rolling to absorb the shock. Behind him, he heard the LSPD officer's heavy feet come to a halt at the fence. He cleared the fence. "Get around the block, cut him off," exclaimed an officer, puffing heavily. The sound of their boots fleeing echoed back to the squad cars. Naruto did not wait. He checked the mini-map. The blue vision cones swept furiously down the street parallel to him. The single star in his view stopped blinking solid white and transformed into a flickering, translucent gray. Wanted level. Evading. He grasped the game now. Hide. Break the line of sight. Wait for the heat to go down. He rushed through the first backyard, avoiding a rusting washing machine and a child's plastic tricycle. He reached a modest wooden fence that separated the properties. He vaulted it with a one-handed push, his momentum propelling him into the next yard. Bark. 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 A big Rottweiler tethered to a doghouse sprang at him with its teeth bared. Naruto dodged the beast with practiced ease, his shinobi reflexes mocking the game's animal AI. He didn't damage the dog. Instead, he jumped over the next wall and landed in a tiny, concrete drainage ditch behind the row of houses. The water in the ditch was ankle-deep and smelled of copper and decay. Naruto knelt low and pressed his back against the trench's cold, graffiti-covered concrete wall. He focused intently on the bright map in his vision. 2 police cruisers were slowly rolling down the street on the opposite side of the wall. The blue vision cones moved back and forth, scanning the sidewalks and peering into driveways. One of the cones dragged straight over the top of the drainage ditch wall, passing barely inches above Naruto's head. He held his breath reflexively, even though his physical lungs didn't require oxygen to remain silent. The mechanical buzz of the police cruiser's engine vibrated through the pavement and against his back. The radio talk buzzed loudly in the night air. "Dispatch, we've lost visual on the suspect. White male. No, wait, Asian male. Wearing a bright orange jumper. Armed with a shotgun. Last seen heading south through Chamberlain. Copy that, unit. Set up a perimeter. Air support is currently unavailable due to weather." Naruto waited. The seconds passed agonizingly slowly. In a true stealth mission, he could go days without moving a muscle. The tension was fake, but tangible. The gray star in his upper right vision kept flashing. Flash. 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 He watched the blue cones on the map go down the street, around a corner and away from his position. Then it occurred. A clear, low-pitched throb sounded in his mind, similar to a strong heartbeat. The flashing gray star had vanished from his UI totally. The red and blue flashing dots of the police cars on his minimap quickly turned into regular, neutral white circles. The cops were still driving about, but they were no longer searching for him. The game's aggro state was fully reset. Naruto let out a long, slow exhale before sliding down the wall and sitting in the shallow water of the ditch. He set the shotgun on his lap and ran his hand through his damp, spiky blonde hair. "Okay," he said quietly to the empty ditch, a broad, genuine grin spreading across his face. "If you stay out of their sight, they just forget about you." That is the dumbest, easiest game of ninja hide and seek I've ever played. He felt great relief as well as a thrill of exhilaration. This universe lacked the sheer, spiritual power of chakra, but it followed a set of principles that he could understand, alter, and finally shatter. He had maximum physical powers, a healing factor controlled by a green bar, and the ability to track his adversary's exact line of sight. Suddenly, his right pocket vibrated again. He took out the black glass rectangle, the fruit phone. The screen illuminated the dim drainage ditch. The red number, 1, above the envelope emblem was still visible. Naruto peered at it, his thumb hanging above the glass. He had learned how to use the shotgun and recognized the cops. Now it was time to work out the technology. He tapped the glass screen on the envelope icon with caution, as if the device was about to explode. The screen changed effortlessly into a text messaging interface. The message came from an unknown number. "Hey. Lamar stated that you carried yourself out there. If you're not dead or in prison, come find me. I've got work. Gerald." Below the sentence, a little notification appeared on his screen. New contact added. Check your map for the G icon. Naruto gazed down at his minimap. Sure enough, a few blocks away, a yellow capital, G, was always glowing. He straightened up, shaking the muddy water out of his boots. He draped the heavy shotgun over his shoulder, the metal barrel resting on his collarbone. He had no idea who Gerald was, and he could hardly recall Lamar, the guy who had picked him up from the odd metal aircraft at the airport. But a ninja always required a mission, and right now, Gerald was the only lead he had in this strange, neon-lit village. Naruto Uzumaki climbed out of the drainage ditch and returned to the streets of Los Santos, prepared to accept his first contract. Chapter 4. The Currency of Chaos. The rain had slowed from a violent downpour to a light, misty drizzle, creating a hazy halo around Los Santos neon signs. Naruto Uzumaki went through Strawberry's damp, desolate streets, his boots squelching softly on the asphalt. He had the heavy, black LSPD pump-action shotgun slung awkwardly over his shoulder, its cold metal barrel resting against his collarbone. He was navigating solely through the bright UI in the bottom left corner of his vision. The small map contained a wealth of sensory information. It did more than just show him the layout of the streets. It highlighted alleyways, denoted elevation changes with subtle tinting, and, most crucially, had a bright, yellow capital, G, that pulsed with a steady, appealing rhythm. That was his destination. Gerald. As Naruto went, his shinobi training prevented him from merely staring at the map. He kept his head swiveling, taking in every element of this alien village. It was a place full with stark paradoxes. Towering glass and steel constructions scraped the sky in the distance, symbolizing tremendous riches and modern technology, but the streets he was now going through were dotted with deteriorating brick buildings, barred windows, and overflowing trash cans. The Hidden Leaf has a strong sense of community, even in the most impoverished areas. There were community gardens, the aroma of cooking rice, and the laughter of kids playing ninja. The only sounds were the distant wail of sirens, the dull hum of electrical transformers, and the occasional violent cry from a dark alley. Naruto thought, this place has no heart. His brow furrowed. It's just metal, stone, and rage. He paused at an intersection. The streetlights above him went from a brilliant green circle to a solid crimson one. He watched as a couple of the mechanical carriages, he remembered Lamar calling them cars, obeyed the signals and came to a halt, while others completely ignored them, rushing past the crossing and honking loudly. As he stepped off the curb to cross the street, something drew his attention. Something was gleaming in the dark passageway between a shuttered booze store and a pawn shop. It wasn't the glaring neon of stores or the antiseptic white of streetlights. It was a gentle, pulsating green glow that hovered just inches above the moist concrete. Naruto instinctively decreased his center of gravity and moved his hand toward the shotgun. He approached the bright object with caution. In the elemental nations, luminous artifacts typically indicated a trap, an explosive tag, or a dormant jutsu ready to be activated. He moved closer, his eyes narrowing. It was not a trap. It was a little, cylindrical piece of paper wrapped in a thin band. And it was absolutely levitating. It bounced up and down in a steady, repetitive motion, defying gravity. What kind of jutsu is this? Naruto asked, poking the floating object with his index finger. When his skin touched the paper, A satisfying chime rang in his head. Cha-ching. The floating roll of paper vanished into thin air. At the same time, a line of green writing appeared in the upper right corner of his view, directly below where the wanted level stars had been. Plus $23. A little, persistent counter appeared below that, reading $23. Naruto looked at his empty palm before returning his attention to the text. Money? He said quietly, his eyes widening. He remembered the Balas gangsters he'd fought before. They must have dropped it as they ran. However, it did not go inside his pocket. He had not personally picked it up and placed it in his wallet. It had just been absorbed into his total, catalogued by the system that now governed his reality. Naruto explained that money floats and can be kept by touching it. He scratched the back of his spiky blonde head. Weird, but convenient. He resumed his journey towards the luminous G on his map, feeling a peculiar sense of success. He had a weapon, had survived a war, and now he possessed currency. He was officially a functioning member of this strange society. A few blocks later, Naruto experienced a dull discomfort in his chest. He glanced up at his UI. The thick, green health bar still lacked the small portion that Bala's SMG fire had taken away. It was not regenerating on its own. His stamina bar recharged as soon as he stopped sprinting, but his life force stayed stubbornly stable. He reflected on the need to cure himself. Normally, I'd let Kurama's chakra heal me, but he reached in again, only to find the frigid, digital wire frames of the quarantine that kept the Nine Tails locked away. I really am on my own here. As he passed past a rundown laundromat, a brightly illuminated vending machine drew his attention. It was painted in a bright, artificial red and white and included an image of an icy, carbonated beverage. The logo said E-Cola, deliciously infectious. Naruto stared at the machine. It hummed with electricity. Next to the coin slot was a little digital display that said $1. He noticed the $23 floating in his peripheral vision. He did not have any tangible coins. He didn't even carry a wallet. However, the rules of this realm were fluid. He approached the machine, raised his hand, and merely tapped his finger on the coin slot. Beep. Immediately, his digital bank account dropped from $23 to $22. The machine whirred noisily, mechanical gears grinding inside, before a heavy aluminum can landed in the dispensing tray with a loud bang. Naruto reached down and retrieved the chili can. He popped the tab, letting out a hiss of pressurized gas, then took a hesitant drink. It was very sweet, with artificial sugar, caffeine, and chemicals. It didn't taste like the fresh tea or rich ramen soup he was used to. It tasted like liquid electricity. He drank the rest of the can in 3 gulps, discarding the empty aluminum. He felt a warm tingling sensation all throughout his body. He was in complete astonishment when the UI in his vision reacted. The green health bar, which had been chipped away by bullets, suddenly surged to the right, filling in fully to form a solid, colorful, unbroken line. The dull ache in his chest went away altogether. Naruto laughed and looked at his hands, saying, "You must be kidding me. A sugary drink cures bullet wounds? This place is amazing." Naruto increased his pace after feeling energized, totally healed, and gaining a basic comprehension of GTA reasoning. The luminous G on his map guided him farther into the Chamberlain Hills territory. The atmosphere became substantially tougher. The streetlights flickered and buzzed, and many of them completely went out. The chain-link fences were corroded, and the concrete walls were covered in territorial graffiti, much of which was the family's gang's vivid, aggressive green. Naruto observed non-player characters, NPCs, gathering in small groups on corners. They wore baggy green attire, smoked thick cigars that smelled strongly of skunk, and carried bottles of cheap beer in brown paper bags. Naruto's bright orange tracksuit and visible firearm caused them to stop talking. They peered at him, their AI programs attempting to comprehend his presence. A number of them spat on the ground, while others muttered angrily. But Naruto saw something important on his minimap. None of the dots had turned red. They appeared antagonistic, but the system did not see it that way. They would not attack until provoked. He remained focused on what was in front of him. The map guided him to a large, low-income residential complex. The concrete walkways were small and strewn with rubbish. He climbed a flight of metal steps that moaned beneath his weight, following the yellow line until he arrived in front of a damaged wooden door on the second floor. Number 4. The yellow G on his minimap disappeared, and a glowing yellow circle appeared on the doormat. Naruto stepped into the circle. The world around him froze abruptly. The wind, the distant sirens, and the gangster's conversation below all blended into a low, echoing hum. The screen went black for a single second. Mission loading. When his vision returned, he was standing in the flat. It was small and crowded, with a strong odor of cleaning chemicals hiding something far more terrible. The walls were discolored with nicotine, and the only window was obscured by a thick, dark curtain. The man sitting on the worn-out plaid sofa in the center of the room was enormous and scary. He wore a dark green jacket over a white tank top, with thick gold chains laying across his chest. His skull was shaved, and his face was cut from pure, unadulterated stone. He was using a pocket knife to gently cut up a brick of neatly wrapped white powder on a glass coffee table. This was Gerald. A familiar person was seen standing by the kitchen counter, drinking from a green bottle. Lamar Davis. Well, I'll be damned. Lamar laughed and slammed his bottle on the counter. He wore his usual green button-down shirt. The mute kid actually made it. I told you. Gee, this kid is built different. I left him at Cypress Flats with a pistol, and I hear from the grapevine he took out 3 ballas with a pump action he pulled out of thin air. Gerald did not look up. He kept slicing the brick of goods, his movements slow, deliberate, and completely silent. Naruto stood in the doorway, examining the room. Neither of these individuals possessed chakra, but the enormous man on the couch radiated a heavy, smothering aura. It was the atmosphere of a man who ruled a criminal empire via terror and violence. It reminded Naruto of some of the darker rogue ninja he'd encountered. I am not mute, Naruto said loudly, breaking the tension in the room. He pointed his thumb at his chest. I'm Naruto Uzumaki, and I don't need a pistol. I fight with my own strength. You sent me a message saying you had a mission for me? Lamar blinked and almost choked on his glass. Damn, he speaks, and he's loud, too. Naruto, what kind of anime-ass name is that, homie? Gerald eventually stopped chopping. He cleaned the blade of his knife down his jeans, slammed it shut, and gently raised his head. His eyes were cold and calculating, devoid of any warmth. He looked at Naruto for a long, heavy moment. To a typical GTA Online player, this was just another unskippable cutscene. Gerald never spoke, and Lamar always performed the translation. But, for Naruto, this seemed like a stare-down with an unstated test of will. Naruto maintained his composure. He stared back, his piercing blue eyes burning with unwavering passion. He'd stared down the 9-tailed fox, Pain, and Madara Uchiha. A drug lord on a filthy couch wouldn't make him blink. After a tense 10 seconds, Gerald nodded slowly, barely detectable. He returned his attention to his merchandise and made a vague chin gesture toward Lamar. Lamar took a step forward while clapping his hands together. Right. So, G likes your style, kid. He likes that you don't ask too many questions and you get your hands dirty. We got a situation. Lamar approached a corkboard on the wall and tapped a fuzzy photograph on it. It featured a gang of men with yellow bandanas gathered around a lowrider automobile. The Vagos. Yellow-wearing fools down in Cypress Flats. They've been creeping up on our territory, trying to push their product in our neighborhood, Lamar remarked in a casual yet serious tone. G don't like that. G wants a message sent. Naruto crossed his arms over his chest. A message? Like a diplomatic scroll? Lamar looked at him for a moment before laughing again. A scroll? Nah, homie. A message. We want you to go down to their meetup under the Olympic Freeway. They're doing a deal tonight. You crash the party, you lay them out, and you take their product. Bring the product back to G, that's the message. Stay off our turf. Naruto absorbed the information. In the shinobi world, this was a typical sabotage and retrieval C-rank mission. Disrupt enemy supply lines and seize their resources. It was dirty, but it was ninja work. So, I go in, beat them up, and bring back the package. Naruto summarized the objective. Beat them up, smoke them, run them over with a truck. I don't care how you do it, Naruto, Lamar replied, throwing Naruto a set of car keys. Naruto caught them easily. Just make sure the Vagos know the families ain't playing. You can take my emperor parked outside. Don't scratch the paint. Naruto examined the metal keys in his hand. He remembered the disastrous consequences of attempting to operate a car upon his arrival at the airport. He swiftly tossed the keys back to Lamar. "I won't need the metal carriage," Naruto firmly stated, a huge grin growing across his face. He reached over his shoulder and grabbed the shotgun's handle, not to use it, but to secure it while stretching his legs. "I'm much faster on foot." Gerald grunted in satisfaction, his voice low and gravelly. The screen went blank once more. The mission started with piercing the heart. When the world returned, Naruto was standing at the bottom of the apartment steps, rain still falling from the dark sky. A bright yellow marker emerged on his mini-map, about 2 miles away in Cypress Flats Industrial District. Naruto snapped his knuckles and rolled his neck till it popped. He was in good health, knew the regulations of the city, and now had a clear goal. "All right, Vagos," Naruto muttered to the empty street, stooping low for a max stat sprint. "Let's see what you've got." The yellow line on the miniature map in Naruto's lower left vision didn't just point the way. It acted as a glowing, digital tether dragging him toward his target. Lamar had offered him the keys to a rusted, 4-door Emperor, but Naruto had zero interest in being confined to a metal box. Instead, he relied on what the system had unwittingly granted him: maxed out physical stats. As he bolted down the wet asphalt of Strawberry Avenue, he didn't run like a normal pedestrian, he ran like an Anbu operative. His sneakers barely seemed to touch the ground. He leaned forward, his arms cutting through the cold night air, his breath coming in steady, controlled rhythms. The yellow stamina bar beneath his health pool depleted at a laughably slow rate. To the few late-night NPCs driving through the streets, he was nothing more than a neon orange blur passing them in the bike lane. "This body feels incredible," Naruto thought, vaulting effortlessly over the hood of a taxi that had stopped too far into a crosswalk. The driver laid on the horn, shouting a stream of programmed obscenities, but Naruto was already a block away. "It's not chakra. It's just raw, unbridled kinetic energy. Like I have the 8 gates permanently open, but without the pain." The environment shifted rapidly as he crossed the city lines. The residential decay of Chamberlain Hills gave way to the towering, rusted silos and sprawling warehouses of Cypress Flats. The smell of the air changed from wet garbage and weed to ozone, sulfur, and stagnant water. The digital GPS line on his map suddenly abruptly ended, replaced by a massive, pulsing red circle that covered a 2-block radius. "UI update. Go to the Vagos meet." Naruto slowed his sprint to a silent, predatory jog. He was approaching the Olympic Freeway underpass. The massive concrete pillars holding up the highway created a cavernous, shadowed environment below, lit only by the flickering amber glow of industrial halogen lamps and the headlights of parked cars. He didn't just walk into the circle. Shinobi rule number 4: never engage an unknown enemy on their chosen battlefield without securing the high ground. Naruto spotted a stack of shipping containers resting against the side of a brick warehouse. He leapt, his maxed-out strength propelling him 15 feet straight up. He grabbed the rusted lip of the top container, hauling himself up silently. From this vantage point, he had a perfect bird's-eye view of the meetup. Beneath the freeway overpass, the deal was going down. There were 2 lowrider vehicles, a classic peyote and a boxy buccaneer, both painted in a blindingly bright, obnoxious shade of yellow. Standing around the cars were 6 men. They all wore variations of yellow clothing. Yellow bandanas tied around their heads or faces, oversized yellow sports jerseys, and baggy khakis. They were laughing loudly, passing a bottle of liquor back and forth. Resting on the hood of the peyote was the objective. It was a dark green canvas duffel bag. But to Naruto's eyes, it wasn't just a bag. It was emitting a faint, pulsating green glow, just like the money he had picked up earlier. It was a mission item. Naruto crouched low on the shipping container, his eyes scanning their weapons. 2 of the Vagos were holding micro SMGs, casually resting them against their hips. The others had heavy, silver pistols tucked into their waistbands. 6 targets, all armed with automatic or semi-automatic projectile weapons, Naruto analyzed, his tactical mind racing. If I drop down and use taijutsu, I can take out 2, maybe 3 before they react. But the moment they open fire, I'll be caught in a crossfire. I don't know if a sugary drink can heal a dozen bullet holes. He reached over his shoulder and unslung the Speedy pump-action shotgun. The cold steel felt heavy and absolute in his hands. He remembered the valley. He remembered the deafening roar, the blinding flash, and the sheer force that had thrown Sasuke backward. This weapon was a localized explosion directed through a tube. It was brutal, inelegant, and devastating. He looked at his UI. Next to his health bar, a small icon of a shotgun shell had appeared, with the number 24 next to it. Limited ammunition. He couldn't afford to miss. "All right," Naruto whispered, his blue eyes narrowing. "Let's see how this village handles a shinobi with a boomstick." He crept to the edge of the shipping container, directly above the closest yellow lowrider. He took a deep breath, perfectly centering his balance, and simply stepped off the edge. He plummeted 20 feet, landing perfectly in the center of the Vagos group. The game engine didn't possess a stealth drop animation for this height, so Naruto hit the concrete with a heavy, resonant thud, crouching low to absorb the impact. The 6 gang members froze. The laughter died instantly. They stared at the kid in the bright orange tracksuit who had seemingly fallen from the sky. "Que diablos?" the Vagos leader shouted, dropping his liquor bottle. It shattered on the concrete. Naruto didn't give them a monologue. He didn't announce his dream of becoming Hokage. This wasn't a duel of ideals. This was a gang hit in Los Santos. He brought the shotgun up to his hip, grabbed the wooden pump, and yanked it back. Clack clack. The sound of a shotgun racking was a universal language. It instantly broke the Vagos' paralysis. The gang leader reached for the SMG on his hip, screaming, "Madalo! Kill him!" Naruto pivoted on his heel, aiming the wide barrel at the leader's chest, and squeezed the trigger. Boom! The concussive roar echoed deafeningly beneath the concrete overpass. The 12-gauge buckshot erupted from the barrel in a cone of fire and lead. At this close range, the impact was catastrophic. The game's ragdoll physics took over instantly. The Vagos leader was lifted completely off his feet, hurled backward over the hood of the yellow peyote, his SMG clattering uselessly to the ground. The incredible recoil jerked Naruto's shoulder backward, but he was prepared for it this time. His maxed-out strength stat absorbed the shock. He instantly pumped the weapon again. Clack clack. Ejecting a smoking red shell that bounced off the pavement. The remaining 5 Vagos erupted into chaotic action. Bang! 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 The sharp cracks of 9mm pistols filled the air. Naruto saw the muzzle flashes in the dim light. He felt a sharp, synthetic sting tear across his left bicep, then another grazing his ribcage. His UI flared. The green health bar chipped down by 15%. He didn't flinch. He used the game's mechanics to his advantage. He threw himself sideways into a dedicated combat roll. A maneuver that felt strangely stiff but incredibly fast within the game's engine. Snapping up behind the front fender of the peyote for cover. Bullets rained down on the lowrider, shattering the windows and sparking loudly against the yellow paint. "Flank him! Get around the car!" one of the gangsters yelled. Naruto watched his mini-map. The red dots were moving, spreading out to surround his position. He couldn't stay pinned down. He was a creature of movement. He blind fired the shotgun over the hood of the car. Boom! Forcing the approaching Vagos to duck back. Seizing the opening, Naruto vaulted completely over the peyote, airborne for a split second. Time seemed to slow down. He spotted a Vagos member aiming a pistol at him from beside the concrete pillar. Naruto aimed the shotgun midair and fired. The blast tore through the gangster's cover, the spread catching him in the shoulder and spinning him violently into the dirt. Naruto landed hard on his boots, immediately racking the gun again. 3 targets left. One of them, wielding the other micro SMG, stepped out from behind the second car and held down the trigger. A hail of bullets tore toward Naruto. Naruto sprinted diagonally, utilizing his impossible speed. The bullets tracked behind him, tearing up the concrete where he had just been. He closed the distance in a heartbeat. The gangster's eyes widened in sheer terror as the orange blur suddenly materialized right in front of him. Instead of shooting, Naruto relied on his instincts. He swung the heavy wooden stock of the shotgun upward, catching the Vagos squarely under the jaw. The sickening crunch of bone was accompanied by a critical hit marker in Naruto's UI. The gangster crumpled instantly. 2 left. They had lost their nerve. Seeing 4 of their crew decimated in less than 30 seconds by a kid who moved faster than a sports car had completely broken their AI morale. "He's a freak, man. Run!" the last 2 screamed, turning their backs and sprinting frantically toward the darkness of the train tracks. Naruto stood up straight, lowering the smoking barrel of the shotgun. He watched the two red dots blink rapidly on his minimap as they fled the area, eventually vanishing completely as they left the mission zone. The deafening echo of the gunfire faded, replaced by the hiss of steam from the peyote's ruined radiator. Naruto let out a heavy sigh, his grip on the shotgun relaxing. He checked his UI. His health bar was down to about 70%. He felt a dull, widespread ache across his body from the bullet grazes, but nothing life-threatening. The ammo counter for his shotgun now read 19. Okay. Guns are loud, they're messy, but they definitely get the job done, Naruto muttered to himself, stepping over the scattered shell casings. He walked over to the ruined yellow peyote. Resting perfectly intact on the hood, completely untouched by the crossfire, was the glowing green duffel bag. Naruto reached out and grabbed the canvas strap. Instantly, the bag dematerialized, disappearing from his hand. At the same moment, a smaller, digital version of the duffel bag materialized on his character model, strapped securely across his back. A sharp, satisfying musical sting played in his head, followed by a large text box appearing in the center of his vision. Package secured. New objective: deliver the package to Gerald's apartment. The miniature map updated. The pulsing red circle was gone, replaced by the familiar yellow GPS line, routing him back toward Chamberlain Hills. Naruto pumped the shotgun one last time, loading a fresh shell into the chamber just in case, and began the trek back into the city. He had completed the hit. Now, it was time to collect his reward. The run back to Chamberlain Hills was eerily quiet next to the exploding pandemonium under the freeway overpass. The Los Santos rain had finally ceased and a dense, humid fog had settled over the streetlights, creating long, twisted shadows across the damp pavement. Naruto was moving at a steady ground-eating speed. The green duffel bag he'd received from the Vagos was strapped to his back, tight and secure, but it felt as if it weighed nothing at all. It didn't bounce off his spine or adjust his center of gravity. It was just there on his character model, a visual cue of his goal. His hands were in his pockets of his bright orange tracksuit, and the hefty LSPD shotgun was safely slung across his shoulders by its thick canvas sling. He drove through the quiet industrial sector, his mind racing to comprehend the incident. In the elemental nations, to take a life, even that of an enemy, was a grave spiritual and emotional matter. Battles were battles of philosophy, of willpower and of chakra. You felt your opponent's life force. But back there at the meetup, it was blank. The Vagos leader didn't get a last word. There was no lingering presence of a fading soul as the shotgun blast impacted him. The dude was just erased from being a danger to a ragdoll of physics. His red dot was no longer on the minimap. It was clean. It was just mechanical. This planet doesn't have chakra, Naruto thought as he exhaled a puff of white air into the cold night. People are all simply separated. No chakra to connect them. Driven by their own selfish motives. It makes them feeble. It makes them reckless. He followed the glowing yellow line on his UI, winding through the alleyways until the familiar, run-down apartment complex in Chamberlain Hills came into view. The gang members who had been lurking outside earlier had dispersed, leaving the concrete courtyard vacant save for a few stray cats digging among the upturned garbage bins. Naruto climbed the creaking metal steps to the second floor, his boots thudding softly. The golden glow of the circle sat dead center on doormat of apartment 4. He went in. The ambient noise of the city was suddenly muffled. For a split second the world went black, the familiar feeling of the mission loading transition flooding over him. When his vision returned he was in Gerald's smoke-filled living room. Nothing was different. Gerald was sitting in the same location on the plaid sofa, only the brick of white powder was now neatly separated into smaller parcels wrapped in plastic. Lamar sat in a folding chair near the window, pounding away furiously on his own iFruit phone. Lamar looked up, his eyes growing wide with real surprise. He glanced at his phone screen and then back at Naruto. Lamar got up, slipping his phone into his pocket. "Ain't no way, man," he muttered. "Not even 30 minutes have gone by. You didn't bag the Emperor, you ain't got no bullet holes in you, and I didn't hear no sirens from Cyprus. What? Did the Vagos just give it to you and ask for an autograph?" Naruto grinned broad and foxy. "They didn't have much of a choice. Like I said, I'm fast. He reached behind his shoulder and unhooked the green duffel bag from his back. He laid it carelessly down on the glass coffee table in front of Gerald. It dropped with a big, satisfying thud. The computerized green glow that had encircled it in the open world disappeared immediately, becoming an ordinary physical object in the cutscene. Gerald stopped carrying powder. He unzipped the canvas bag gently, his black gaze running over the contents. There was a period of silence in the room, broken only by the low drone of the television in the corner. Gerald dug in his pocket and brought out a hefty stack of banded dollars and threw it on the table next to the bag. Naruto was given the same gradual, unnoticeable nod. Respect. All of a sudden Naruto felt that the world around him was frozen in time with an amber filter. A strong artificial bass drop buzzed into his own head, then a sweeping triumphal orchestral chord. Huge, luminous golden letters suddenly appeared in the middle of his field of vision. Mission passed. Naruto flinched, stepping back as the letters filled his vision. Below the gold writing, white numbers in a smaller font quickly counted up. Plus $3,500. He heard the sharp cha-ching chime reverberate in his head again. He looked to the upper right of his UI. His digital bank account, which had been languishing at a meager $22, jumped, settling at a healthy $3,522. But this was not all. There was a circular icon with the letters RP, which filled up with a bright blue glow. Notification pinged. Rank 2 achieved. He sensed a sudden, slight change in his body. It wasn't some unleashing of his chakra network, but mild strengthening of his senses. The system was acknowledging his experience, integrating him further into the programming of the server. It seemed as if his maximum health had increased just a little bit. The amber filter faded. The text faded out. Things returned to normal. Lamar clapped his hands together. Good looks, dude. Well, you really did it. G is pleased. But you look at you, dude. Lamar waved up and down at Naruto's costume. You appear like a walking traffic light. And you can't go wandering down the street with LSPD's property strapped on your back. Cops saw that boomstick, they'll shoot you for breathing. Naruto gripped the sling of the shotgun and drew it tighter. It's a good weapon. It saved my life, and I do love orange. Yeah, well, in Los Santos, orange gets you shot at, and stolen cop guns makes you a criminal. Lamar shook his head. Now see, you have a little paper in your pocket. You want to settle yourself in. Heating clean. Your own equipment. A few blocks away. Look at your little phone map for the gun icon. Place called Ammunition. Ammunition? Naruto said again, tasting the odd word. Yeah. Tell the freak in the counter you want a slice. Get yourself together, Naruto. G will hit you up when we received more job. The screen turned black. Naruto reappeared at the foot of the apartment steps. The rain had ceased completely. The sky was getting a little lighter, the morning was approaching. He pulled out a sleek black iFruit phone from his pocket, and tapped on the screen until the map application appeared. He ran his finger across the glass, amazed at how natural the text seemed, considering how little experience he had. Sure enough, 3 streets away in the commercial district a white luminous emblem in the shape of a revolver was softly pulsing. Okay, Naruto said, raising his arms above his head. Come, let's call on the village blacksmith. He walked briskly amid the awakening streets. Delivery trucks were beginning to roll out, and the first few NPC pedestrians of the morning commute were plodding along the sidewalks, clutching their mugs of coffee. Naruto came into a large separate building made of red brick and reinforced glass. On the roof was a giant patriotic billboard featuring a bald eagle gripping an assault gun in its talons. A neon sign above double doors of reinforced steel read Ammunition. He pushed open the thick glass door. A happy electronic chime sounded. The inside of the shop was aggressively bright, lighted by glaring fluorescent tubes. The walls were lined with pegboards, each filled with hundreds and hundreds of guns. Assault rifles, sniper rifles, light machine guns, rocket launchers, an armament that could rival the entire secret stash of the Leaf Village, all carefully exhibited behind glass or strung on clean hooks. The odor of gun oil, polished steel and fake pine air freshener was overpowering. Behind a thick waist-high glass counter was a middle-aged man in a tight dark green polo shirt tucked into khakis. He had glasses for shooting, and a headset mic. Welcome to Ammunition, where we protect your right to protect yourself. The cashier barked gleefully, his voice bearing the slightly artificial cadence of an NPC trained with only a handful of greeting lines. Naruto stepped up to the counter, his eyes wide as he took in all the weapons. "All this belongs to you? To anyone?" "You bet your life we do, son," the clerk said, waving pistols at him. "Background checks are for communists. Anything I can get you today?" Naruto leaned against the glass counter. "Lamar said I needed my own heat. I've got this." He nodded at the police shotgun slung over his back, but that gets a little attention. "Ah, the common pump. A classic for home defense, but a touch large for concealed carry." The clerk nodded, not even the slightest bit concerned that a youngster in an orange tracksuit was openly wearing a stolen cop gun. "I'll set you up with a starter piece." Naruto looked down. At the bottom of his view a prompt appeared. "Press to browse weaponry." He thought at once. The clerk immediately moved back, falling into a rigid idle animation pose, hands clenched behind his back. The scene behind the bar blurred a bit and a crisp, holographic menu popped into Naruto's field of sight. It was a categorized list: pistols, SMGs, assault rifles, shotguns, sniper rifles, heavy weapons, thrown, armor. Naruto mentally went over the list, captivated by the interface. But he soon saw trouble. Every single weapon has a red padlock icon hovering over it. Assault rifle. Available at rank 24. RPG. Unlocked at level 100. Level? Naruto said. He recalled the blue RP circle filling up post-mission notifying him he was rank 2. "So I can't buy the big stuff yet since the system thinks I don't have enough experience." It was a perverse sort of sense. In Konoha, a genin was not allowed to carry high-level explosive tags or specialized blades until they proved their worth. Here the system was imposing the similar hierarchy. He clicked the pistols category. Unlocked was the very first option. Combat pistol minus $600. It looked slick and small and super tactical. Naruto chose it. The holographic menu took $600 from his digital bank account, leaving him with $2,922. Suddenly the clerk interrupted his idle animation, reached behind the counter and down on the glass he set an immaculate matte black combat pistol. "A fine choice," exclaimed the NPC cashier, with enthusiasm. The combat pistol. Lightweight, reliable, contains a 16-round magazine. Good for popping caps on anybody who looks at you cross-eyed. Naruto grabbed up the weapon. It felt quite different than the shotgun. It was the perfect weight, fit well in the palm of his hand. It didn't have the overwhelming brute force weight of a pump action, but it felt precise. It felt like something he could actually make work with his taijutsu. He brought the menu back up, scrolling down to ammunition. He paid another $120 to buy a surplus of 9mm rounds, watching the ammo counter in his UI surge from 0 to 200. His gaze found the armor tab before he shut the menu. He recalled the amount of damage the SMG fire had done to his health bar earlier. He pressed the tab. Super light armor. Available from rank 1. Standard armor. Unlocked at rank 15. He bought the super light armor for $500. He had just finished the transaction when he felt something weird across his chest. He glanced down. He didn't have a Kevlar vest on top of his orange jacket. A brand spanking new segmented blue bar popped up on his UI, right above his green health bar. His tactical brain registered the extra armor capacity. "It's a supplementary shield before my real vitality gets hit. Invisible shielding." He closed the interface. The cashier gave a polite nod. "Have a nice day, and remember, if you didn't buy it at Ammu Nation, it's shit." Naruto slid the combat pistol into the band of his tracksuit pants. He strolled out of the overcooled store and into the steamy morning air of Los Santos. The sun was just beginning to rise above the distant Vinewood hills, and a golden light was spreading across the smoggy cityscape. And he had a new weapon, a suit of invisible armor, and almost $2,000 in his name. He was a level 2 player. Naruto took a big breath of the city. It still reeked of exhaust and rubbish, but it was starting to seem a little more like home. "All right, Los Santos," Naruto chuckled as he looked over the enormous concrete jungle. "What now?" The Los Santos sun did not rise with the same crisp, pristine clarity as the morning star above the Hokage monument. Instead, it bled through a thick, hazy layer of ocean fog and automobile smog, leaving a rich, golden-brown hue on the concrete sprawl. Naruto Uzumaki stood on the pavement outside Ammunition, the electronic bell from the door booming behind him. He took a deep breath. The air tasted metallic and dry, devoid of the lush aroma of pine and damp dirt that he had become accustomed to. However, as he gazed down at his own hands, he felt a strong surge of life. He was in great health. A faint, transparent blue shield insignia pulsed gently over his green health bar in the lower left corner of his vision, his recently acquired super light armor. The matte black combat pistol was tucked tightly into the waistband of his orange tracksuit, cold and weighty, but promising devastating effectiveness. The stolen LSPD shotgun remained slung over his back, its barrel pointing toward the smoggy sky. He was learning the rhythm of the metallic settlement. It was a place dominated by acquisition and survival. A shrill, persistent ringing interrupted his thoughts. Naruto startled slightly and instinctively grabbed his revolver. However, the sound did not come from an enemy, but rather from his right pocket. He reached in and took out his sleek black eye fruit smartphone. The screen was lighted and vibrated violently against his palm. A string of digits he couldn't understand flashed across the glass, followed by a vibrating green button shaped like a telephone receiver and a red one next to it. He understood text messaging, but this was a live call. He carefully lifted the flat glass slab to his ear, relying on his intuitive understanding of the user interface. Naruto spoke with authority and curiosity. "Ah, outstanding. The technology works," a voice said through the tiny speaker. The accent was thick, strangely Eastern European, and exuded an oily, salesman-like excitement. "Am I chatting with the young entrepreneur Lamar Davis just told me about? The fast one?" Naruto briefly glanced at his phone before returning it to his ear. "I am Naruto Uzumaki. Who is this? Excellent, Naruto. An exotic name fits an exotic talent. I am Simeon Yetarian. The premier, no, the only reliable luxury automobile dealer in the greater Los Santos area." The man stopped, as if waiting for a response that Naruto did not provide. "Lamar tells me you have a specific set of skills. That you work efficiently. That you avoid asking unneeded questions. I like it. I have a business proposition for you, my son." Naruto questioned the legitimacy of the opportunity to earn money. His only previous experience in the city was stealing drugs for a gang lord. "Absolutely. You and I are businessmen, therefore come to Premium Deluxe Motorsport in Pillbox Hill. I've uploaded the GPS coordinates to your device. Do not make me wait, Naruto." Naruto lowered the phone once the line went dead, emphasizing the value of time. On the luminous digital minimap in his peripheral vision, a dazzling, golden yellow letter S appeared. It was a few miles north, directly in the middle of the towering towers he had seen from a distance. "Simeon," Naruto said, testing the name. He slid his phone back into his pocket. "Well, it's better than standing around here." He began jogging with a steady pace. He did not use his maximum sprint this time. He wanted to watch the city as it awoke. The transformation from the gang-infested streets of Strawberry to the commercial district of Pillbox Hill was abrupt. The rusted chain-link fences and graffiti-covered brick walls gradually faded away, replaced by clean glass stores, manicured pom-poms planted in concrete squares, and towering steel and reflective glass structures. The pedestrians here were also distinct. There were no more baggy green garments or angry glares. These NPCs wore smart, expensive outfits, tapped frantically on their own iPhones, and carried leather briefcases. Naruto noticed a clear example of Los Santos reasoning while jogging at a busy junction. A yellow taxicab crashed into a silver sports car after running a red signal. The hit was loud and forceful, smashing glass throughout the junction. In the elemental nations, such a crash would elicit a large number of concerned citizens and medical men. The driver of the silver sports vehicle emerged from the incident unscathed, took out a baseball bat, and smashed the taxi's windshield. The cab driver just sat inside, periodically uttering a pre-programmed slur. The businessmen on the sidewalk did not look up from their phones. They simply walked around the glass. Naruto continued jogging, shaking his head and thinking, "This place is completely insane. Everyone is just a coiled spring ready to snap." After following the yellow S on his minimap, he came at a pristine showroom on a busy junction. The facade was painted a clean white, and large floor-to-ceiling windows showcased rows of glistening, high-end autos. Naruto pushed through the huge glass doors, which proclaimed, Premium Deluxe Motorsport, in bold red lettering above. The cabin smelt strongly of luxury vehicle polish, leather, and strong cologne. A man stood in the showroom, aggressively polishing a cherry red sports car's bonnet with a microfiber cloth. He had a crisp, slightly ill-fitting gray suit, a pink button-down shirt, and a balding head with a well-trimmed goatee. As the door chimed, the man looked up, his eyes widening slightly at Naruto's sight. The bright orange tracksuit, spiky blonde hair, obvious LSPD shotgun on his back, and combat pistol tucked into his waistband did not scream, professional associate. "Ah, you must be the Uzumaki boy," Simeon remarked, his oily smile faltering briefly before returning to full salesperson brilliance. He put the cloth aside and approached with arms wide spread, as if embracing him. "Welcome, welcome to the core of Los Santos economy." Naruto crossed his arms and remained completely still. He let Simeon's arms to sink uncomfortably. "You said you had a mission for me." "He says it's a mission." Simeon laughed, making a loud, strained sound that resonated off the glossy automobiles. He stepped behind a slick black desk and leaned against it. "I enjoy the enthusiasm. But we're not mercenaries, Naruto. We facilitate the American dream. I sell these lovely gadgets to anyone who want them." "So you're a merchant," Naruto concluded. "Unfortunately, the economy may be brutal. Sometimes my clients forget to pay me. They sign the loan paperwork, drive away in a gorgeous vehicle, and then ignore my calls. They believe Simeon Yetarian is a charity. They think Simeon Yetarian is a fool." His voice became stronger, and his cheeks flushed with genuine, programmed rage. Naruto found the man's emotional instability taxing, as his heart rate spiked. "So you want me to go get your money?" "No." Simeon slapped his hand upon the desk. "I want my automobile. The money is gone, squandered on their frivolous, capitalist vices. I need the vehicle returned to my showroom. Here's where you come in. Lamar says you're speedy. You handle problems quietly." Simeon tapped the computer keyboard. A moment later, Naruto's phone rang. He pulled it out. It was a text message with a photo of a large, aggressive-looking muscle automobile painted a rich metallic purple. "Vapid Dominator. License plate. Out of time. This vehicle belongs to a very arrogant young man living in Rockford Hills," Simeon said, pointing a finely manicured finger at Naruto. "He is currently 2 months behind on his exorbitant interest payments. I need you to go to his house, repossess the car, and drive it back here, untouched. There is not a single scratch on the paint. Do you understand?" Naruto returned his attention to Simeon after looking at the picture on his phone. A profound hush permeated the showroom. "I need to drive it?" Naruto asked, his voice losing some of its confidence. Simeon looked at him, puzzled. "Well, yes. How else will you transport a 2-ton piece of Detroit steel back to my dealership? Carry it on your back?" Naruto thought it briefly. With his maximum strength, he could certainly lift and push the rear axle like a wheelbarrow. However, this would likely harm the paint and violate the mission constraints. "Fine," Naruto sighed and rubbed his neck. "I'll bring the metal carriage back." Simeon smiled, his fury dissipated. "The message contains GPS coordinates. Do not fail me, Naruto. Simeon Yetarian values loyalty." During the loading process, the screen briefly went black. Naruto stood outside the dealership while the world faded back in. A fresh, solid yellow line appeared on his minimap, extending far to the north and looping up into the affluent, twisting roads of the Vinewood Hills. The mission started with repossession. Naruto took off using his tremendous speed. The trek led him out of the congested commercial district and into the winding, tree-lined streets of Rockford Hills. The air here was noticeably fresher, with aromas of freshly cut grass, costly irrigation systems, and prosperity. Massive, vast houses lay behind tall iron gates. The yellow GPS line led to a circular driveway in front of a modern, multi-million-dollar property with white concrete and floor-to-ceiling glass. The purple Vapid Dominator was parked at the top of the driveway, glittering in the morning sun. Naruto jumped the short stone wall and landed softly on the groomed lawn. He crept up the driveway, his shinobi training keeping him completely in the vehicle's blind areas even though no one was there. He approached the driver's side door. He gazed into the window. The keys were not inside the ignition. A pop-up came at the bottom of his UI, Press triangle Y to enter the vehicle. Naruto mentally engaged the prompt. He anticipated the game to just unlock the door. Instead, the game's engine took control of his character model and executed a pre-programmed animation. Naruto watched in horror as his right arm drew back reflexively, crashing forcefully against the driver's side glass. The tempered glass shattered into thousands of pieces, falling into the beautiful leather interior. The automobile suddenly emitted a thunderous, repetitive sound. Honk, honk, honk. The headlights started flashing madly. Car alarm. Ah, quiet. Shut up, Naruto hissed, bringing his palms up to his ears. The game pushed him to complete the rest of the animation. He reached through the smashed glass, grabbed the interior handle, and slid into the driver's seat. The leather was chilly. The dashboard was a jumbled mess of dials, blinking lights, and a steering wheel. The alarm was still loud enough to wake up the entire rich neighborhood. A different animation took over. Naruto's hands darted beneath the steering column. He violently ripped away a plastic panel, revealing a nest of brilliantly colored cables. He took a red and a blue wire, peeled the casing with his teeth, and smashed their raw copper ends together. A shower of blue sparks exploded in the footwell. The Dominator's supercharged V8 engine roared loudly and aggressively. The automobile alarm was instantly silenced, replaced by the deep, idle rumble of the exhaust. Naruto sat motionless in the driver's seat, grasping the leather-wrapped steering wheel. He could feel the raw, mechanical power vibrating through the flooring and into his boots. It seemed like you were sitting on top of a dormant explosion. Naruto's pulse rate increased slightly as he thought, okay, it's only a machine. Like a puppet from Sand Village. I control the joints. He gazed down at his feet. 2 pedals. One wide and one narrow. He remembers Lamar tapping the narrow one to get the automobile moving and the wide one to halt. He cautiously put his boot down on the narrow pedal. The game did not take into account the player's maxed-out strength stat when applying pressure to the gas pedal. The Dominator, an extremely powerful rear-wheel drive muscle car, reacted fiercely. The rear tires screamed on the driveway's beautiful paver stones, causing a tremendous cloud of white smoke. The car's back-end fishtail edged sharply to the right, with the rear bumper avoiding the mansion's stone pillar by only inches. Naruto panicked, releasing the gas and slamming both feet on the large brake pedal. The car abruptly came to a halt, causing the engine to stall with a loud metallic sound. The driveway was silent save for the hissing of the smoldering back tires. Naruto sat motionless, his blue eyes wide and his fists holding the steering wheel so firmly that the leather creaked. He'd fought gods. He'd fought tailed beasts. He'd survived the Chidori. But this 2-ton metal vehicle was horrifying. Okay, Naruto exhaled softly, causing his heart rate to settle. Gentle. It requires a light contact with the chakra. I mean, the pedal. After bypassing the ignition, he twisted it and the V8 engine restarted. This time, he barely pressed the accelerator. The Dominator moved forward, gently rolling down the driveway and out onto the street. He cranked the steering wheel, amazed by how the big front wheels responded to his input. A fresh GPS line appeared on the minimap, directing him back to Premium Deluxe Motorsport. Naruto Uzumaki, the savior of the Hidden Leaf, drove a stolen muscle car at a painstakingly careful 20 miles per hour. His hands were locked in a stiff 10-2 position on the wheel, frightened of scratching Simeon's paint work. The drive down from the clean, manicured heights of Rockford Hills was agonizingly slow. Right now, Naruto Uzumaki was a shinobi who could move faster than the human eye could follow, and he was going exactly 17 miles an hour. He sat straight in the driver's seat of the stolen purple Vapid Dominator, both hands clenching around the leather-wrapped steering wheel, knuckles stark white. His brilliant blue eyes darted quickly across the twisting asphalt road ahead and the circular illuminated mini-map in the bottom left corner of his view. Clank. Rumble. Under the hood, the supercharged V8 engine roared eagerly, almost demanding to be let loose. But Naruto handled the tight gas pedal like a sensitive explosive tag. He pressed it with the tip of his boot, scared of the catastrophic, tire-spinning power he had seen in the driveway just minutes previously. All right. Left curve ahead, Naruto whispered to himself, tongue jutting out from the corner of his mouth in great concentration. He nudged the steering wheel a fraction of an inch. The big muscle automobile rolled slowly across the double yellow line. Too much, too much. He pulled the wheel back, overcorrected, and the Dominator fishtail-ed, the passenger side tires hitting the curb hard. Honk. Honk. A shiny silver Obey tailgater whizzed past him in the other lane. The NPC driver rolling down his window to shout a litany of pre-programmed, highly colorful Los Santos obscenities. "I'm doing the best I can," Naruto shouted after the car as it pulled away, but the sound was muffled through the thick glass of his own windows. For Shinobi, transportation was an issue of physical endurance. You poured chakra into the soles of your feet, clung to the bark of giant trees, and jumped for miles. You had perfect power over your own body. This was something else entirely. He was inside a 2-ton metal beast, trying to make his will felt through a succession of pedals, gears and wheels. It seemed awkward, disjointed and exceedingly risky. Not a mark on the paint was Simeon's key need, and he was laser-focused on it. He drove through the twisting hills and onto the broader, multi-lane street of Del Perro. The morning traffic was getting heavy. He stayed in the right lane, behind a slow garbage truck, with the Dominator. He let out a small sigh of relief. All he had to do was follow the yellow GPS line on his minimap straight into Pillbox Hill. Simple. And then the UI broke his peace. A piercing digital tone sounded in his head. Beep beep. 2 solid white stars sprung into existence in the upper right corner of his view. They never blinked. They sat there, lit by a strong, forceful light. At that same instant, a slow, beating bass drum throb began to pulse in his ears, drowning out all the other noise of the city. Wanted level. 2-star Naruto blinked, his heart racing. 2, I ain't shoot nobody this time, I just busted a window. The logic of the game was sacrosanct. The rich guy from Rockford Hills had obviously contacted the cops as soon as he'd heard the car alarm. Grand Theft Auto prompted an immediate 2-star response. Naruto gazed down at his minimap. The tranquil, empty circle was suddenly under siege. 3 clear red and blue flashing dots had appeared on the map and they were converging on him fast. The hated blue vision cones swept out from the dots, projecting onto the streets. The howl of sirens rose through the morning air, growing by the second. He gazed at himself in the glass. 2 blocks back, over the top of the hill, a black and white LSPD cruiser with its light bar blazing blindingly was in pursuit. The blue vision cone on the minimap stretched, pulling fast up the street. Naruto tried to keep himself cool. Just be natural, he thought. Maybe they don't realize it's this carriage. Naruto was the white arrow on the map and it touched the blue cone. Immediately the 2 white stars in his upper right vision glowed a vivid solid crimson. The UI flickered on. LSPD. Pull that purple Dominator over. Now, I've got a stolen vehicle. A police loudspeaker boomed, its voice echoing off the buildings around. Suddenly, the police cruiser behind him rushed forward. Not caring about the flow of traffic, it weaved violently between NPC automobiles. They know it, Naruto was panicked. He weighed the choices. He might stop, get out of the automobile and run. He would lose them in the alleyways in minutes, his stamina and speed both maxed out. But if he left the car, Simeon wouldn't pay him. If he screwed up his first serious assignment in this village, who knew what the system would do to him? Had to deliver the automobile. The LSPD cruiser was right on his ass now. The grill of the police car hit the rear bumper of the Dominator hard. Crunch. Naruto's strong forward thrust at the steering wheel was absorbed by the super light armor. Hey! Watch the paint! Naruto screamed and immediately his dread was replaced with anger. Shinobi rule number 1: adapt or perish. Naruto's teeth clenched, the blue eyes narrowing into angry, focused slits. He no longer handled the car as if it were a fragile egg. He seized the leather wheel, put his boot solidly on the broad gas pedal and shoved it flat to the floorboards. The vapid Dominator roared with demonic fury. The rear tires lost traction, immediately squealing against the asphalt in a cloud of white smoke. The huge horsepower kicked in, sending Naruto flying back into the leather seat as the hefty muscle car shot ahead like a cannonball. His UI's digital speedometer was racing, 30, 50, 80 miles per hour. The LSPD cruiser was suddenly left in the dust, but the hunt had only just begun. Now Naruto was barreling down Del Perro Avenue at 90 miles per hour in morning traffic, driving a rear-wheel drive muscle car he had zero expertise controlling. He didn't know how to slide, he didn't know the physics of understeering or oversteering. But he didn't have to. He had something no other participant in the game had. Maxed out, superhuman reaction time. A crimson vehicle came out of a side street squarely in his path. A typical human driver would have slapped the brakes and wrecked. Naruto felt as if the world slowed down to a crawl. He saw the panic on the face of the NPC driver. In half a millisecond, he calculated the distance, the speed, the trajectory. His hands moved like a blur. He yanked the wheel hard to the left, weaving the great purple car through the 3-foot space between the red sedan and a city bus with flawless dexterity, then wrenched it to the right to avoid the traffic heading toward him. The Dominator jerked wildly on its suspension, the tires screeching in protest, but Naruto's uncanny reflexes kept it perfectly balanced. He was driving on instinct alone, correcting the slips of the automobile before the physics engine had even fully processed them. Suspect is escaping at high rates of speed. Backup. Backup. The police radio buzz flowed into his UI. Then a bizarre series of inputs registered. In his hurried steering, Naruto's thumb had slipped and hit a small cluster of buttons on the steering wheel that were the equivalent of the game's D-pad. Right in front of his eyes, a huge circular holographic menu suddenly appeared, blocking his view of the road. It was the radio wheel. The car's superior sound system burst to life at the same time, blaring out music at startling volumes. The cabin filled with a high-energy, synthesized pop music and an energetic female vocalist. Musical notes. Lady, hear me tonight. 'Cause my feeling is just so great. What's that sound? Naruto screamed over the music, waving his palm wildly through the holographic radio wheel, trying to rid it. I can't see the road. How do I get rid of the genjutsu wheel? He thumped the steering wheel blindly. The radio station change. Musical notes. Uno, dos, tres, cuatro. Beep 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 beep. Musical notes. East Los FM played a furious electronic mariachi beat. Make it stop. Naruto screamed, pounding furiously on the controls until the radio wheel disappeared, and he was left with Los Santos rock radio playing a classic rock hit. It was noisy, chaotic and absolutely weird. He looked away, back to the road. 2 additional police cars came rushing from an intersection up ahead, positioning themselves to set up a roadblock as the minimap showed. Naruto went on. He looked at his UI. The blue cones were sweeping the main avenue, but to his right he observed a hole in the guardrail that led down into a large, concrete-lined ditch. The storm drain in Los Santos. Hang on. Hey, empty car, shouted Naruto. He jerked the steering wheel to the right and simultaneously tugged on the handbrake lever to see what would happen. The Dominator whipped sideways in a powerful slide. It tore past a line of plastic traffic cones and went completely off the elevated pavement. Naruto and the 2-ton muscle vehicle were hanging in the air for 2 terrible seconds, descending onto the big concrete aqueduct below. Gravity had her. The Dominator came down on the slanted concrete bank of the storm drain with a horrible, metal-groaning crunch. The suspension bottomed out, sending sparks 10 feet into the air as the undercarriage raked the cement. Naruto fought the wheel, his maximum strength forcing the tires to dig into the slick, algae-covered concrete. The car steadied, racing across the middle of the huge, empty drainage canal. The police cars screeched to a stop, up high on the street level. Naruto inspected his minimap intently. The police icons were right over him, but they were trapped on the overpasses. The blue vision cones raced frantically over the bridges and the streets, but they could not direct themselves down into the deep hole. The 2 red stars in the upper right corner were no longer a solid red glow in his vision. They started to flicker a translucent gray. Sneaking. Yes, Naruto whooped, slapping the steering wheel in victory, as rock music blared from the speakers. You can't get me, you dumb metal boxes. He let the Dominator move slowly, at a regulated pace, along the center of the aqueduct, following the concrete river as it wound its way under the city. Not once did his gaze leave the blazing gray stars. 30 tortuous seconds ticked by. The sirens over him began to fade, drifting further away as the AI cops searched the wrong grid. And then he heard the loud thump in his skull. The stars faded out altogether. The minimap was back to its tranquil, neutral state. The wanted level was removed. Naruto let out a loud sigh, not realizing he was holding his breath. He eased back into the plush leather sofa, the rush of adrenaline slowly draining from his system. He reached over and finally located the volume knob for the radio, tweaking it until the music dropped to a low, bearable hum. He glanced at the yellow line on his GPS. The storm drain had actually brought him closer to Pillbox Hill. He spotted a concrete slope that ascended up again to street level, seamlessly blending onto a quiet, industrial road. 10 minutes later, cruising at a perfectly legal and painfully dull 30 miles per hour, Naruto drew the purple Vapid Dominator into the shining white lot of Premium Deluxe Motorsport. He parked it right in the middle of the glowing yellow delivery circle. The world turned black. Mission loading. His eyesight came back and he was standing inside the showroom, beautiful and perfect. Simeon Yetarian was virtually jumping out of his office, a big predatory grin painted across his face. Simeon made a careful circle around the purple muscle car, scrutinizing it like a jeweler. Naruto held his breath. The rear bumper was a bit dinged from the police slamming him, and the undercarriage was certainly scraped from the storm drain jump, but the paint was generally intact. Magnificent. Simeon clapped his hands, his voice echoing in the showroom. Maybe a tiny ding on the fender, but nothing my mechanics can't buff out before lunchtime. What a marvel you are, Naruto Uzumaki. A genuine professional. Simeon reached into his fitted business jacket and drew out a huge envelope of cash, slapping it into Naruto's hand. The amber filter poured over Naruto's vision again. Mission accomplished plus $5,000 achieved rank 3. Naruto smiled and shoved the letter into his tracksuit pocket. His digital bank account now showed a very healthy $7,922. The insane fear of running from the cops dulled, to be replaced by that deep, fulfilling thrill of leveling up and gaining capital. There will be more work for you, my boy, Simeon added, already bringing out his iFruit phone to seek for his next victim. Keep your phone charged. Very rich Simeon Yetarian shall make you. Naruto turned and walked out the glass doors of the dealership, going out again into the bright morning of Los Santos. He stared down the street, at the endless procession of cars, the high buildings, the faraway, smoggy horizon. He had a gun, he was armored, he was rich, and he'd just been through his first high-speed chase. I have to learn to drive, Naruto murmured to himself, cracking his knuckles. If I'm going to be running this village, I can't be running away from the metal carriages. I've got to learn them. The morning sun had finally burned away the dense coastal fog, illuminating Pillbox Hill's towering glass buildings in a harsh, brutal light. The city of Los Santos was fully awake. The walkways were jammed with angry, coffee-clutching NPCs dressed in smart suits and pencil skirts, fully unaware of the world's hyperviolence. Naruto Uzumaki stood on the corner of Swiss Street and San Andreas Avenue, a brilliant orange standout among the grays, blacks, and muted blues. He had $7,922 in his digital bank account, a fully loaded combat pistol concealed in his waistline, and a stolen LSPD shotgun slung over his back. Despite his newfound wealth and status, he felt vulnerable. He saw the traffic flow through the vast crossroads. The metal carriages, the automobiles, trucks, and shrieking motorcycles moved in a smooth, terrible mechanical synchrony. In the shinobi world, mastery of one's surroundings entailed mastering the elements. Walking on water, mounting sheer cliffs without using hands, and gliding silently through dry bush. The atmosphere consisted of steel and asphalt. If he couldn't control the machines, he'd always be at a disadvantage. He'd be nothing more than a speedy child on foot, easily run down by a fully armored SUV or killed in a drive-by shooting. Naruto reminded himself of Kakashi Sensei's advice that a shinobi must master the tools of their time. He needed to train. In Los Santos, training entailed committing grand theft auto. He did not desire another muscle car. The purple Dominator he had driven for Simeon was like trying to ride a ferocious, unsealed-tailed beast. Too much raw power and too little control. He needed something balanced. Something he could grasp the foundations of. His blue gaze surveyed the street, parallel to the sidewalk. A basic, four-door sedan was neatly parked against the curb, immediately in front of a high-end cafe. It was finished in a bland, unremarkable metallic gray. The insignia on the trunk said Albany, Washington. It was not flashy. It did not scream wealth or gang affiliation. It was Los Santos' equivalent of a basic and sharpened training kunai. Naruto checked his minimap. There were no flashing red and blue dots around. The coast was clear. He stepped off the curb and calmly approached the driver's side door. He looked through the tinted glass. The interior had a boring beige fabric. No keys are in the ignition. A familiar white prompt appeared at the bottom of his vision. Press to enter the vehicle. Naruto drew a long breath. He did not want the system to put him through that noisy, violent window-smashing animation again. He concentrated his attention, attempting to push his own will over the game's strict rules. He reached out and wrapped his calloused palm around the cold metal doorknob. Instead of pulling mindlessly, he concentrated a minuscule fraction of his maximum might on the locking mechanism inside the door. He pulled. Click. The lock cracked inside due to sheer, localized strain. The door opened easily, fully bypassing the window-smashing sequence. No glass was shattered. No car alarm sounded. "Ha! Take that, system," Naruto smiled as he slid into the cloth driver's seat and closed the door behind him. He sat in silence in the cabin. The steering wheel felt different than the Dominator's leather. It was a cheap, harsh plastic. He peered down at the steering column. Because he had not destroyed the window, the game engine adjusted. This time, he wasn't forced to rip out the wires. Instead, a new prompt appeared: Hotwire Vehicle. Naruto placed his hands beneath the steering column's plastic casing. He viewed the car's interior wiring as a chakra network. The battery provided power, and the engine served as the destination. He only needed to link the paths. He grabbed the plastic plate and yanked it away with a quick tug to reveal the ignition cylinder. He used his thumb to bodily force the cylinder to turn, demonstrating strength that no ordinary human possessed. The Albany, Washington's engine sputtered gently before settling into a peaceful, repetitive hum. Vehicle acquired. He had stolen it brilliantly. No stars, no sirens. "All right. Let's start with the basics," Naruto muttered, clutching the plastic steering wheel at 10 and 2 places. He recalls his awful start in Rockford Hills. He needs to treat the pedals as if he were practicing water walking. Too much chakra caused him to sink or aggressively propel himself into the air. Too little, and he wouldn't move. It requires perfect, constant equilibrium. He pushed his right boot on the narrow gas pedal, but this time, he did not push. He simply laid the weight of his foot on the spring. The Washington rolled easily away from the curb at a crawling speed of 5 miles per hour. Naruto's eyes lighted up. He slowly shifted the driving wheel to the left, entering into the slower lane of traffic. He was doing it. He was driving. He drove through Pillbox Hill with a large gap between his front bumper and the automobiles ahead of him. He carefully stopped at each red light, admiring how the large brake pedal responded to mild pressure, bringing the hefty sedan to a smooth, rocking halt rather than a neck-snapping stop. "This is similar to chakra control," Naruto chuckled out, the strain leaving his shoulders. "The pedal represents the flow. The wheel represents the direction. It's just a different style of jutsu." He needed a safe space to push his limits. He checked the huge, luminous map in his UI's pause menu, which he was gradually learning to traverse mentally. He saw a huge gray rectangle near the Los Santos International Airport. A large multi-story parking garage. It would be mainly deserted at this time of day. He drove south along the vast highways, following the GPS route. He gradually upped his speed, accelerating the Washington to 40 and then 50 miles per hour. The wind swept past the windows. He felt the road's tiny vibrations flow up through the tires, the steering column, and into his hands. He was starting to feel the machine, learning about its weight distribution and turning radius. He drove straight through the airport parking garage, ignoring the toll booths and snapping the wooden boom gate in half. He spiraled up the concrete ramps until he reached the rooftop. It was massive, flat, and completely deserted, except for a few scattered light poles and faded yellow parking lines. "Okay, metal beast," Naruto replied, his eyes narrowing in determination. "Let's see what you can really do." He pressed his foot on the accelerator. The Washington was not a sports car and lacked the powerful torque of the Dominator. But it continued to rush ahead, its 4-cylinder engine groaning loudly. Naruto sped toward the concrete edge of the roof at 60 miles per hour. Instead of panicking, he waited until the very last second. "Brake!" he cried, putting his left foot on the broad pedal and pulling the steering wheel hard to the right. The hefty sedan shouted with protest. The cheap tires locked up and smoked ferociously against the concrete. The vehicle veered over into a big, rolling slide. The rear bumper swung in a sweeping arc, just missing the concrete retaining wall. Naruto did not let go of the wheel. He feathered the gas pedal, tap, 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 to keep the RPMs high while counter-steering into the slide, much like he would adjust his weight to maintain balance during a high-speed taijutsu pivot. The Washington made a beautiful 180-degree turn and came to a stop exactly where he desired. Suddenly, a bright blue UI element appeared in the bottom right corner of his vision, over his weapon icons. It was a progress bar divided into 5 separate portions. Driving skill. +1 100th. The initial segment of the bar was filled by a fraction of a millimeter. Naruto marveled at the user interface. Stats. They track my actual physical progress. The more I do it, the better the system allows me to manage the cars. In the shinobi world, training required years of relentless, grueling physical work with minimal returns. Here, the system actively rewarded him while measuring his progress in real time. If he filled up this driving skill bar, the game's engine would give him tighter handling, greater braking, and more control in the air. He used the rooftop as a high-risk training area for an hour. He created fictional obstacle courses between the light posts. He practiced J-turns, putting the car in reverse, whirling it about, and flawlessly shifting back into drive. He practiced braking thresholds, figuring out how hard he could press the pedal before the tires locked up and lost traction. The blue progress bar in his UI slowly and steadily increased. +2 100ths, +5 100ths, +10 100ths. He was sweating despite the chilly morning breeze. His hands ached from clutching the plastic wheel, but he wore a huge, exciting grin. He was mastering the meta. He was adjusting to the rules of Los Santos. He brought the smoking, tire-shredded Albany, Washington to a halt in the center of the roof and shifted the transmission into park. He sank back against the cloth cushion, wiping a bead of sweat from his brow. "I'm getting the hang of this," Naruto panted, reaching into his pocket and pulling out an E-Cola he had purchased at a gas station along the route. He popped the tab and let the sugary, artificial healing liquid flow down his throat, filling up his health bar. Just as he swallowed, his iFruit phone vibrated furiously in his pocket. It was not a telephone call. This was an SMS message. However, the notification sound was not the normal joyful ding he'd heard from Gerald or Simeon. It was a jarring, distorted flash of digital static. Naruto grimaced and took out his black phone. The screen was glitching. The typical, colorful program icons were quickly replaced by lines of green code scrolling down a black screen. "What is wrong with this thing?" Naruto grumbled and tapped the glass screen. "Did I break it?" The code was cleared, leaving only a simple text message interface. The sender was simply identified as unknown. Naruto read the message aloud. "I've been checking the server logs for the past 6 hours. You do not have an IP address. You have not linked a Rockstar Social Club account. You do not exist in the player registry database. Your player ID is a series of distorted null values. Yet, here you are, literally existing in a lobby, maxing out your base stats on day 1, and shattering Simeon Yetarian's windows without executing a single word of code." Naruto's blood became chilly. Lamar did not speak like this. Gerald did not talk like this. Simeon did not talk like this. This individual, this entity, was aware of the system. They were aware of Naruto's records, statistics, and the very fabric of the reality he was stuck in. A second notice quickly appeared on the screen. "I'm not sure whether you're a rogue developer build, a sophisticated AI script, or a ghost in the machine. But you're walking, talking abnormality. And anomalies are extremely profitable. If you want to understand what's going on with you, quit performing small repossession jobs for idiots and come see me." A link to GPS coordinates appeared underneath the text. Naruto focused on the television, his mind whirling. Someone was observing him. Someone who could see through the facade of Los Santos to the code that ruled his existence. He couldn't decide whether to be afraid or relieved. Until this point, he believed he was the only one who understood the strange UI, floating money, and health bars. Now there was someone else. A third and last text appeared. "I have unlocked a waypoint on your HUD. Do not bring the cops. L." The phone screen flashed before reverting to its normal, flawless form. Naruto gazed down at his peripheral vision. The circular minimap refreshed immediately. A bright, blazing white letter L appeared on the eastern edge of the city, amid an industrial neighborhood deeply tinted in gray. Naruto sat in silence in the stolen automobile, the engine ticking as it cooled. He had a choice. He might reject the advice, continue stealing automobiles, and accumulate fortune from the ground up. Alternatively, he might drive into the unknown and meet the man who was hacking the exact reality he was stuck in. Naruto focused on Shinobi Rule Number 2, replacing his initial shock with a ferocious determination. Information is the most valuable weapon in every conflict. Naruto shifted the shifter back to drive. He examined his rearview mirror, his piercing blue eyes fixed on his own reflection. He clutched the steering wheel with renewed confidence. "Okay, L," Naruto said, placing his boot into the throttle pedal. "Let's see what kind of game you're playing." The Albany, Washington drove down the parking garage's spiraling concrete ramps, racing out into the midday Los Santos sun and going straight for the white L on the map. The trip from Los Santos International Airport to the eastern industrial section of the city was a quiet, systematic lesson in restraint. Naruto Uzumaki maneuvered the purloined Albany, Washington through the heavy, mid-morning traffic of the Olympic Freeway. He watched the road, his hands in the correct position on the cheap plastic steering wheel. He was not working on pure maxed-out reflexes anymore. He was deliberately anticipating the flow of the metal animals surrounding him. When an 18-wheeler, big enough to be a giant, started to slip into his lane, Naruto didn't yank the wheel sharply the way he would have an hour ago. Instead, he took his boot off the accelerator, let the vehicle pass and merged smoothly in behind it. The small blue bar denoting his driving skill had consumed roughly a quarter of the bottom right of his UI. He could feel the difference in his bones. The hefty automobile no longer seemed a foreign, laborious item, but an extension of his own body. The steering was tighter, the brakes were more sensitive, the transmission switched with a smooth, predictable cadence. "Patience," Naruto said to himself, a faint smile on his lips. "For once, Kakashi-sensei would be proud of me. I haven't exploded anything in almost 2 hours." He followed the shining white line on his minimap, exiting the expressway and descending into the dusty, sun-baked neighborhood of La Mesa. The skyscrapers of glass that reached toward the heavens in the financial sector were gone, replaced by enormous flat-roofed warehouses, chain-link fences topped with razor wire, and the heavy, mechanical groan of manufacturing machinery. The air was thick with pollution and the scent of sulfur and cheap chemical dyes. The white GPS line led him down a short alley filled with trash, to the back-loading dock of a huge red brick building. The aged brickwork was lettered in peeling white, "Darnell Bros Garment Factory." Naruto slammed the gearshift into park and killed the motor. The lane was silent save from the distant bark of a stray dog. He stepped out the automobile, readjusting the hefty LSPD shotgun on his back, making sure the combat pistol was secured in his waistband. He glanced at his minimap. The stark white L was throbbing steady, near the center of the building but slightly upward. Second floor. Naruto walked up a pair of rusty metal stairs and knocked on a massive steel door on the side of the building. Just above the doormat was the unmistakable, brilliant yellow circle of a mission marker, hovering precisely. He didn't think twice. He walked into the light. The sounds of the alley quickly died away. The world flickered into a pitch-black abyss for a fraction of a second, the loading transition of the game. When his vision returned, the first thing was the fragrance. It was a rich mix of old cigarette smoke, burning ozone from overused devices, and smelly Chinese takeout. He was in a tight, dark corridor. To his left, a grimy window looked out over the main factory floor, where dozens of NPCs leaned over sewing machines in a repetitive, unskippable ambient movement. But the lighted L was not there. It was pointing at a wooden door at the far end of the corridor. Naruto moved forward, his shinobi steps making no sound at all on the scratched linoleum floor. He went to the door and pushed it open. The room beyond was a shrine of chaos technology. Corkboards filled every inch of wall space with fuzzy images and schematics and red string connecting seemingly unconnected events. But the real highlight of the room was the vast array of computer displays, at least a dozen of them, flashing with sophisticated maps, scrolling lines of green code and live security camera feeds from all over Los Santos. In the middle of the technological storm, a man in a modified wheelchair sat crouched over a keyboard. He had a strong receding hairline, thick-rimmed glasses and a rumpled plaid shirt. He was typing with a frenzied, caffeinated energy, his eyes flying back and forth between 3 distinct screens. "Don't move," said the man. His voice was harsh and tight and it vibrated with a fierce paranoia. He kept his eyes on his screens. "Don't take another step, don't draw that stolen pump action from your back, and for the love of heaven don't try to use your radial menu." Naruto froze, narrowing his eyes. "You're the one who sent me the message. You are L. Lester. Lester Crest," the man snapped before eventually turning his wheelchair to face Naruto. In his right hand, which until now had been entirely hidden under the desk, there was a small, heavy pistol aimed directly at Naruto's chest. "And you're a huge walking liability." Naruto didn't flinch at the gun. He'd seen guns faster. He was armed with super light armor. What intrigued him was the atmosphere of the man. Lester Crest was no physical threat whatsoever, but his mind was a frenzy of calculating, dread and ingenuity. Naruto resembled Shikamaru Nara. Only Shikamaru was held in a dark room for 10 years drinking pure coffee. "I'm Naruto Uzumaki," he said quietly, without reaching for his weapons, nor showing any hostility. Yes, Naruto Uzumaki," Lester ridiculed, blankly waving his left palm over a monitor behind him. The screen was full of 1,000 lines of fast-moving text. "I have been seeing your name in the server error logs all morning. You know what you're doing to the back end of this city." "Truthfully, I don't know what a backend is," said Naruto. Lester looked at him. His finger was perilously close to the trigger of the gun. "You expect me to believe you don't know? You spawn in Los Santos without an IP ping. You don't have a social club registry. The system doesn't know which box to put you in. It gives your physicality as a level 100 player character, but your behavioral logic as an untethered NPC. You did not activate the less than enter _ vehicle _ locked greater than animation when you ripped the window of Simeon's automobile open. You used kinetic damage to force the lock, without even breaking the glass frame." Lester rolled a little closer, his eyes wide beneath thick glasses. "Who created you? A rockstar dev build testing a new melee system? Are you a rogue AI script imported by a modder? Speak up." Naruto folded his arms across his chest, the bright orange of his tracksuit a stark contrast to the dark, dingy workplace. "I am not a script. I am not code," Naruto murmured, his voice falling an octave to carry the massive, ancient weight of a shinobi who'd fought in a world war. "I'm from the Hidden Leaf Village. I was fighting my best friend in the Enns Valley. A rent in the sky. It drew me in, and I found myself in an alley in this village with a glowing map in my eyes and numbers telling me how healthy I was." Lester looked at him in total stillness for 10 tortuous seconds. The only sound in the room was the buzz of the server fans. Slowly, Lester lowered the handgun, clicking on the safety, and tossed it onto his cluttered desk. He drew a long, wheezy breath and dragged a palm down his face. An all-encompassing dimensional displacement contained within the GTA Online servers. A human soul uploaded into digital architecture, Lester mumbled, turning his wheelchair back to his displays. He began to type furiously again. "It is stupid. It's sci-fi. It breaks every known law of thermodynamics and digital computing." Lester slammed the enter key with a flourish, which means it's the only explanation for the data I see. "You believe me?" Naruto asked, shocked. Even Kakashi had to see it himself before he bought into this ridiculous talk. "I believe in data, kid," Lester remarked, adjusting his glasses. "The data indicates you don't exist, but my security cameras show you standing in my office in the most hideous orange clothes I've ever seen. So you're a ghost in the machine. A living bug." Lester brought up a fresh screen. It displayed a 3D wireframe model of Los Santos. "This city runs on rules," Lester said, and his voice became a staccato lecture. "Everything is written. Police. Gangs. Pedestrians. They have behavioral loops. This is a metropolis where even the players, the other high-level criminals moving around, are confined by the physics engine. They can't move that rapidly. They can jump only so high. They can only interact with items that have an interaction prompt." Lester whipped around and pointed a finger straight at Naruto. "But you picked a lock on an automobile. You were driving a police cruiser in Cypress Flats. You got hit with a spray of SMG bullets in the chest and patched it up by chugging a can of E-Cola. Yeah, the healing juice is fantastic." Naruto grinned and gave a thumbs up. It's an item flag, snapped Lester, annoyed. It's meant to recover 15% of your base health pool, not sew your flesh back together. The system is attempting to project its rules onto your foreign biology and it is failing terribly. Lester turned himself into the furthest corner of his office. A huge, heavy iron safe sat against an exposed brick wall. It looked old, dusty and with massive locking bolts. "I need a physical test," replied Lester, his eyes blazing with frantic scientific interest. "I need to see the instant the engine of the game falls down around you." Naruto walked to the safe and looked at it. "Do you want me to open it?" Lester pulled up a line of code on a nearby tablet. "A normal player can't open that safe. It's a static environmental prop. There is no inside. It doesn't have hinge animation. It is, for all intents and purposes, a solid wall with a high-resolution texture painted on it to make it look like a safe. The gaming engine actually calls it an immovable object." Lester looked up from his tablet, a challenging little smirk on his face. "Open it." Naruto walked over to the iron prop. He extended his hand and laid his palm on the chilly metal. Lester was right, it didn't feel like a door. It seemed to be fused with the brick wall behind it, one solid block of stuff. There was a soft spot for everything in the elemental nations. If you put enough concentrated force, enough raw chakra, on a single point, anything may be broken. Naruto couldn't use Kurama's chakra right now, but the system had given him maxed out physical stats. There was no need to pick the lock, he had to shatter the physics engine. Naruto spread his legs, lowering his center of gravity. He slid his fingers into the little, rough space between the door and the frame of the safe. There was no mechanical give he could sense, just solid polygons. "Here goes nothing," grumbled Naruto. He tugged. He didn't just use his arms, he utilized his whole body, shoving his max stat strength through his core and into his fingertips. Nothing happened for a short second, and then the universe began to scream. There was a horrible shriek of digital sound in the office. It sounded like metal scraping against glass, through a speaker that was blown out. The air around the safe suddenly started to warp violently. The high-definition textures of the iron door spilled into jagged, limitless spikes of brown and gray, ripping through the visual fabric of the space. Lester's monitors sang bright red at once. "Error. Collision mesh violated. Warning. Removed static entity number 8849. Holy mother of code. Error. Physics thread crashing. Attempting reboot." Lester dropped his tablet and mumbled. Naruto yelled, and his boots dug into the linoleum floor, not even seeing the visual tear apart of the reality of the game. And then the game engine gave up, with one last terrible application of sheer kinetic force. Snap crash. The whole front of the safe didn't open up, it tore itself away from the wall. Naruto stumbled backwards, carrying a big, flat sheet of iron that was entirely hollow on the inside. There were no textures, rendering as a brilliant, neon pink emptiness where the game had not bothered to paint the rear of the thing. He dumped the huge glitching sheet of metal on the floor. It clanged loudly, splitting halfway through the flooring and trembling wildly in its place. There was no safe, simply a hole in the brick wall showing a glitchy, limitless skybox of blue vacuum under the map. Naruto wiped his hands, breathing a little hard. He looked over at Lester, a foxy, confident grin on his face. "So, did I pass the test?" Lester Crest was paralyzed. He looked at the glitching neon pink metal vibrating in his floor, then at the blue void in his wall, and then at the youngster in the orange tracksuit. For a second Lester's brain, usually 5 steps ahead of everyone in Los Santos, went totally blank. Then, slowly, a horrible smile began to spread across his face. It was the smile of a man who had just learned he owned the ultimate weapon. "You passed the test, Naruto," Lester panted, quickly spinning back to his main terminal. "Just made the entire notion of security in Los Santos obsolete. Vault doors. Reinforced glass. Armored bank vehicles. To the system they're walls that can't be broken through. These are recommendations for you." Lester began typing with a passion that bordered on madness. Simeon played solitaire with a supercomputer. You've got Gerald taking down street-level thugs. They don't get the larger picture, but I do. Oh, I do. Lester typed the final character. The giant screens on his wall flickered, and images of heavily protected locations across the city appeared. The Fleesa Banks, the Pacific Standard Public Deposit Bank, and Merryweather Securities' enormous base. Naruto Uzumaki. Lester remarked, turning his chair to face him, his eyes flaming with ambition. How would you like to graduate from petty street crime? And become the most dangerous ghost this city has ever seen? Naruto glanced at the blueprints. He witnessed high-security compounds, armed guards and high-stakes incursion. He saw S-rank missions. Naruto raised his hand and moved the headband he had been wearing since he was a genin. Tell me the mission, Lester. Naruto smirked, flashing those blue eyes. I'm ready to get to work. Stay tuned for more. Thank you for taking the time to listen to this video. I'm thrilled you watched the video. If you enjoyed it, be sure to like and subscribe for even more exciting content coming your way soon.